Greetings and good Friday morning, this 17th of March, 2023, third decade of the 21st century. It is St. Patrick's Day, 2023, still third decade of the 21st century. If for some reason you're new to my channel and you're not familiar with my work or whatnot, I always open with stating that it is the third decade of the 21st century, just to sort of point out the fact that it is the third decade of the 21st century, and we're still talking about some stuff that is like years and years ago, like we're trying to rewind the clock and go back. But that's just me. That's how I do things. Also, if you're new, I like to read, react, and respond. I like to do one of two things. I like to get super nerdy and kind of meta on, nerdy topics, or I like to get socio-political. This video is going to be a little bit of a catch-all. All right. First and foremost, I have to do some read, react, and responds, and then I've got some stuff that I want to talk about. So first and foremost, based on my video from the 13th of March 2023, Stace Catalan, the one viewer of mine that does take the time to comment, mentioned that she's been busy with her second book and she wanted me to watch the 16-minute video on Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about anti-Semitism and hate, because Arnold is a Republican and I viewed the video as a call to stop hatred within what is essentially has split the Republican Party in two. MAGA supporters versus more Reagan Republican. I think he sees how this split hurts his party and continue to do more damage based on the affiliation of those who carry hatred within the right. So MAGA is short for Make America Great Again, as in let's focus internally on America, so on and so forth. I don't know that those people are hateful. I think that within modern media, social media, etc., they've been given the moniker of hateful. I think people that subscribe to the concept of MAGA also can make up some extreme versions of conservatism. Most modern conservatives also happen to have their roots deeply embedded with church. And as is such, churches tend to be rather inflexible. So if you're part of the LGBTQ plus alphabet mafia type, if you're on that spectrum, or if whatever the case may be, you've basically been convinced that the Republican Party is very anti-you, when in fact basically the churches are very anti-you, so to speak. I don't know that MAGA Republicans are filled with hatred. I think that's basically a lie that's been told. I know in the video he used images of the Proud Boys. I don't know that the Proud Boys are a hateful organization. Again, I think that's slander that's been spread based on some of the content and stuff that I've been exposed to. My limited knowledge of the Proud Boys was essentially kind of like a rebellious organization, be like, hey, there's nothing wrong with being a man, and there's nothing wrong with being proud to be a man. But everybody's entitled to feel the way that they want. It goes back to several videos I've made on any number of topics. Confirmation bias. How does somebody change their beliefs? How does somebody deal with their confirmation bias? Media bias, and the media, convincing us of this, that, or the other. Which is why lately, if I do expose myself to content, I try to expose myself to people that are neither right nor left, but reserve the right to be like, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. So like the Joe Rogans, the Russell Brands, the Patrick Bet-Davids, people in, or even Tim Pool, people in that sort of zeitgeist where they're not really left and they're not really right, but they're just like, hey, that's stupid. And they're not afraid to call it out, or if it's beyond obvious, they're not afraid to call it out. So, I don't know, it also goes back to another video I made about labels, where you're not allowed to label somebody, you're only allowed to label yourself, but then if the label has any kind of negative virtue to it, you don't want the label. It's really weird, and it's gotten complex. I don't know where Arnold Schwarzenegger would line up with the modern day Republican Party. If you're new to my channel and you're kind of curious where I go with this, I have a tremendous amount of bias against the Democratic Party, but my bias goes all the way back to historical reasons and namesake alone. You can try to pretend to convince me that the Democratic Party has changed their stripes, but to me it's like, okay, if the Nazi Party from Nazi Germany still existed to this day, but they tried to change their ways, how many of you could still not get past the name Nazi? That's kind of where I'm at with the Democrats. You know, when you go back to the Confederacy and Jim Crow and segregation and civil rights and anti-voting and all that, the Ku Klux Klan, I can't get past the name. All right. Oh, so you're a Republican then? No, I'm not a Republican. I'm not entirely thrilled with the Republican Party, because when the Republican Party decided that, you know what, we're gonna go ahead and partner up with the religious types. You know, that seems like a good solid voter base. And I was like, you know, surprisingly enough, religious types can be very, very rigid and not very open to things that are outside the scope of their religion in general. So I'll just leave that one alone. So I don't know where Arnold Schwarzenegger lines up. You know, I mean, it used to be at one point in time, most people with common sense agreed that hatred was bad. But, you know, speaking of hatred, interesting transition. Real quick, let me get this one out of the way. So if you're not watching it, or if you're not caught up, spoiler alert, stop right now. I'm talking about the Winchesters. So spoiler alert, stop what you're doing right now and fast forward like 2 to 3 minutes. I propose the theory that based on the story and the way everything's going on the new series Winchesters, produced by Jensen Ackles and his wife Danielle, that this version of John and Mary takes place in a different universe where things are different. And according to the first season finale, that's exactly what it is. This is a completely different universe. It's not the one that our Jensen, it's not the one that our Sam and Dean grew up in. It's not the same John and Mary that we were used to. So it was kind of like, oh my God, I was right. And I didn't have any prior knowledge. I totally guessed at it. So that was kind of cool. Speaking of Jensen, depending on who you are, most of you may be familiar with the fact that Jensen was on a movie called Rust, in which case there was an incidental shooting that resulted in the loss of life and the injury to another. I don't know the legalities of it, other than a channel called Crime Circus posted the 90+ minute interview with the Santa Fe police via Jensen Ackles. What I will say is this. For some reason, I've always been impressed with Jensen. Thought highly of him based on how he's conducted himself. But after watching this interview, like, my respect for him has gone up even more. The way that he conducted himself, the way that he comported himself, and his just genuine honesty as well. Having watched the interview, I'm left with 3 things. And this is strictly hyperbole. I want to make sure that everybody understands this is just an opinion. It's strictly hyperbole. It's strictly conjecture and speculation. I'm not trying to make any statements of fact. In the interview, Jensen talked about several different things. That there were some problems with the camera crew. That some of the camera crew were rather upset with some of the conditions. Something to do with travel. You can watch the video for yourself. He mentioned that Alec Baldwin is very polarizing with some of his political views. And then he mentioned that there was rumor and scuttlebutt that the armorer had taken some of the weapons out against permission to go shooting, and that she had potentially been drinking over the weekend and may have forgotten to clear the weapons. During the interview, nothing was confirmed. It was all conjecture and speculation, and Jensen freely admitted to that. Which, for any rational person, leaves you wondering, because there's enough plausibility to each. Is it possible that somebody on the film crew was so disenfranchised and so upset that they attempted to sabotage things by putting live rounds on the set? It's possible, but even Jensen said that's a long way to go. That's a hell of a stretch to just demonstrate how angry you are. Then he talked about the whole Alec Baldwin thing, where it was like, is it possible that, you know, that maybe in that part of New Mexico where maybe perhaps it's conservative, it's pro Second Amendment, that somebody is so anti-Alec Baldwin that they, I don't know, somehow snuck live rounds on the set. I mean, it's possible, but he said that's a very, that's a long stretch. That's that's a lot of effort. And he said, the one that sounds most reasonable, while albeit a rumor, was that the armorer herself, after having been denied permission, or I don't even know if that's rumor or speculation, but that the armorer had borrowed the weapons, checked the weapons out, took them shooting to have a little fun, maybe even drank a little alcohol, and perhaps did not completely check and unload all the weapons. You could watch the video, you could see all the details. I gotta tell you, as a rational person who can from time to time indulge in a little bit of hyperbole, all these things make sense. Is it possible that a crew person from the film crew was so pissed off and upset that they potentially tried to sabotage the set? Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's possible. It just seems like an awfully risky thing where I just don't know if the payout is worth it. Is it possible that somebody was so upset with Alec Baldwin that they attempted to discredit him by putting live rounds on the set, perhaps in some of the firearms? I mean, it's possible. It still seems like a long way to go for I mean, what was the intended payout? Is it possible that the armorer did check the weapons out, did take them shooting, didn't clear them all? I don't know. I mean, anybody working in that capacity, here's where I'm stuck. And Jensen didn't commit to anything. Jensen didn't say where his opinion was. He just basically, Jensen's whole thing was, I want to know. I want to know how the hell live rounds got on set, and I'm very curious how many live rounds were in Alec Baldwin's gun. Were there any live rounds in my gun? Were there any live rounds in anybody else's gun? And then what really impressed me was how he goes on to talk about how he could have participated in the conjecture and the rumor and the scuttlebutt and the gossip, but he actively chose not to. But that the rumor and the conjecture and the scuttlebutt and the gossiping has really, really pissed him off, because he knows what he knows. And then there's what everybody's been saying, to include media outlets, you name it. And I found that really impressive. And how do I put this? Obviously, I'm not necessarily thrilled with Alec Baldwin over some of the more polarizing things that he said, to include some of his anti-gun rhetoric. Some of the things that Jensen said that really, really impressed me was, in spite of the fact that somebody who's trusted to do these checks has handed him a weapon, he does his own personal checks. Because anybody who's worked with guns may not know it the same way, but understands you have to treat every weapon as if it was loaded. So that's what Jensen does. He does his own dry fire in a safe direction into the dirt, to make sure that the weapon in fact is clear, that the dummy rounds are dummy rounds. And that really impressed me. Whether or not Alec Baldwin does not do that, whether he hasn't worked with that many guns in the many films and things that he's done, that he takes it on faith that the people that have been entrusted to do this, I understand. I just think that maybe now, as a more cautionary tale, that may be a greater series of checks and balances. And Jensen did go on to say that nobody was purposely lackadaisical. It's just a low-budget film. They're trying to get things done in an expeditionary manner. I mean, I don't want to steal from the video, but I was really impressed with some of the stuff that came out. And he did go on to elaborate how Alec was not messing around on set, like a lot of gossip and rumor has said. They were trying to get a good close-up of a slow draw leading up to a scene where Jensen's character confronts him in a church, and they were trying to get a nice close-up of Alec doing a slow draw from his holster. And then Jensen even said, I wasn't there, I mean, I was outside, but I wasn't there to physically see what was happening. But to the best of his knowledge, it was just, they were just going over and over the slow draw. So he's not really sure why the firearm discharged. And I was terribly impressed by that. He wasn't trying to add anything to it. You know, he's an actor, right? He wasn't trying to add anything to it. He wasn't trying to give more to it. He was like, look, this is all I know. You know, you'll have to talk to other people to find out what really happened. And I was terribly impressed by that. And, you know, at the end of the day, it is a tragic event. And what the impression I was left with was what happened. And that's exactly what Jensen was asking is, why? Why were there live rounds on the set? Who is responsible for this? And he wasn't trying to necessarily point blame. He would, the law enforcement officers were asking him a series of questions like, whose job was it for this and whose job wasn't for that? And he's like, all right, technically speaking, this is this person's job and that's this person's job. Beyond that, I don't have any reason to believe anybody was lackadaisical, that anybody wasn't doing their job to their utmost. This is a tragic event. I don't know why it happened, but I'd like to know why it happened. And what freaked him out even more was that after that, he and Alec Baldwin were supposed to shoot, or they were supposed to film a shootout scene where if there were still more live rounds in Alec's gun and if there were live rounds in Jensen's gun, they could have been shooting live rounds at one another. So putting it all together, right? Theory, conjecture, whatnot. If there was somebody maliciously involved because of hatred in their heart, I often wonder if people actually sit and take a moment to calculate the potential consequences of their actions. Before I even took the courage to post a single video online, I must have recorded at least 16 or 17 videos before I was comfortable posting something to the internet. Now granted, I made the woeful mistake of thinking my videos would be way more popular than they really were, and I've been pleasantly surprised that they haven't been. But in the event that they were, I was preparing myself and I was sanitizing my content to make sure that while I'm true to myself, I'm recognizing that other people think and feel differently, and they may not be bad people. They just think and feel differently. And I was trying to take accountability for my potential actions. If somebody did this, I'm curious, what was their desired outcome? And was this the desired outcome? Or, you know, are we ever going to find out that somebody was upset, somebody was pissed off, somebody was just trying to get a little revenge, and this thing just went too far, and this was an unfortunate outcome? But hey, I said my piece. I'd like to hear from you. All right, whether it's something I talked about previously or the Winchesters or Rust, I'm just looking to create conversations, and more specifically, if we can disagree on something, let's disagree in a civil manner. All right, we don't have to be split between these two sides of left and right. We don't have to be polarizing. All right, we can disagree in a civil manner. And if you do, I promise I will read, react, and respond. And I would greatly appreciate it if you did. And if you did, you're awesome. Till next time, have a safe weekend.